Hey everybody, Eric from Dead Tech here, and I want to offer an explanation, but not an apology, for why it's been so long since I've produced any content. The reason is, my wife Amanda and I actually took a vacation. We spent a few days in Dubai, because we were going to lay over there anyway, and then 2 weeks in Phuket, Thailand. It has been our first vacation in, I don't know, first true vacation, probably like 2.5 years. Because when you're building and bootstrapping a business, if you go on vacation, the business just kind of stops. So you kind of tend not to do that. But we're a little bigger now, a little more established, and we've got some great staff that actually made this possible. So I wanted to completely unplug, do not only just like not work, but not even kind of like quasi work like this, content creation. We just laid on the beach for a couple of weeks, did a few tours, but mostly relaxed, read. It was great. It was restorative, so I obviously won't apologize for that. I will be bringing content more regularly here, however, though. Probably haven't produced a video in a month or so. So yeah, that's what I've been up to. Now, in terms of the reader question roundup, let's take a look at what we've got today. I have one about whether I'm aware of domain-driven design, another one that's about tax rate of being an independent consultant versus an employee, a third one that is about how to financially deal with overseas clients in terms of billing. And then question 4 is going to be advice about kind of a career shift from an administrator to presumably a software developer. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned and I will dive into the reader questions. Okay, reader question 1. And I have it up on screen here. This is actually a blog comment. That's where I excerpted this from. And it is in response to a blog post that I wrote, and I will link in the description. That is, it's called The Renaissance of the Problem Domain as a First-Class Concern. And so this blog, this comment is a response to that blog post. And the premise of the blog post was, I'll go into that a little bit because it makes the comment make more sense, obviously. So I wrote this post, and I think it was in response to something I had seen Uncle Bob Martin write about.
So when a king made a law, when a pharaoh made a law, it had to be written down.
Gosh, I don't actually remember the original article anymore. But I think it talked about one of the things that a software developer, he's like really into this whole like craftsman thing. One of the things that a craftsman should do is be invested in and care about the problem domain. And I fully agree with that. And in fact, I wrote this post to say that I think one of the things that's missing, and I think maybe we've gone too far down this rabbit hole of specializing in programming, and that one of the ways we could maybe come back from that and be more productive would be to specialize in something else. And one of those things could be, in fact, the problem domain. Sorry, I got distracted by something off screen, but don't worry, back on mission. So regarding this idea of specializing in problem domain, we kind of tend to specialize in programming, in the programming world. Like, I'm a great example of this. So I spent 5 or 6 years in my first job, which is kind of a long time for a programming job, but there was a lot of variety, but it was a company that made mail sorting equipment, manufacturing equipment. And I wrote a variety of pieces of software that helped control the equipment and kind of do peripheral things. So that was one domain, and in that domain I did some like C and C++, Linux control stuff, some Java web development, some Windows-based stuff. So there was a lot of variety there. And then I left that job and took a job working for a company that made hearing aids, and we were doing the fitting software for those hearing aids, which was in WPF and .NET, and that was just completely different domain and a completely different tech stack than I'd ever worked on before. And then I went to work for an app dev body shop where I was in a different domain and stack constantly. And I think that's kind of emblematic of how we as an industry tend to approach things. So the result of this is if you're kind of a programmer that bounces around from job to job, stack to stack, domain to domain, you're kind of a perpetual novice. And that can be a lot of fun. It's very... It satisfies the mastery itch to go out and to get a new set of skills, to learn about a new thing, to learn a new programming language every couple of years. It's really rewarding, but at the same time, it's really, it doesn't create, say you were like a doctor specializing in some field, and over the years, you were focused on that field, you became an expert. It doesn't lend itself well, what we do as programmers, to becoming an expert in anything. And that has career implications, meaning that you're kind of always this, even if you get a title like senior, as far as the organization is concerned, you're kind of at the bottom of everything. You're just a generalist kind of commodity laborer. And it also has implications for like users, clients, customers, which is that everybody doing the programming work for them is kind of a perpetual novice, and that can be sort of unfortunate. So I get into it a lot more in the post, and I lay out the reasoning, but basically what I'm saying here is that one way to combat this would be, you can't really get away from having to learn new things in a field changing as fast as tech. So even if you stayed in the same tech stack, for instance, like you've been an enterprise Java developer forever, they're still throwing, Lambda expressions and new features into the language. You're going to have to learn things. But you could maybe alleviate some of that by, say, staying in the same problem domain and maybe thinking of yourself, like if you look at my career, maybe early on I would have been like a mail sorting programmer or like a hearing aid and audiology programmer. These aren't great terms because I'm just kind of thinking of this off the fly. It maybe needs some marketing dressing up. But you get the idea that, sure, I'm a programmer and I can adapt to different stacks, but I'm kind of focused in this field. So that was the thrust of the blog post. The question then is, the reader question says, there is quite a developed body of techniques that fall under domain-driven design. There are also older techniques that go under names like participatory design, cooperative design, etc. Are you familiar with these, and what do you think of them? The problem you identified has a history. Okay, so domain-driven design I am familiar with. Participatory and cooperative design I am not familiar with. Just kidding, I am familiar with it. And the reason I am is because I paused recording and went to look it up on Wikipedia. So I'm by no means an expert. This was like 2 minutes of research, but participatory and cooperative design seems to be sort of a tried and true strategy over the years, bringing people of different disciplines together to participate in the design. So as I think the phrase on the Wikipedia page was that consumers, users, whatever, felt designed at rather than designed for. So it's to bring all constituents, all participants in the process together to kind of have a holistic design approach.
Come together right now.
And then domain-driven design, yes, I am familiar with that. It kind of has an interesting, there's an organizational piece to it, and then there's a software approach piece to it. I did some years back buy the Eric Evans book, links below in the description, domain-driven design. So I'm familiar with it both in terms of that you want this ubiquitous language, you want people in the tech who are building the thing, as well as the business users, stakeholders, customers, all to be using the same terms for everything. And then there are these kind of more technical approaches like defining aggregate roots in the system and how entities interact. So I'm familiar with all of these, I'm familiar a lot with domain-driven design, and now very, very surface level familiar with the others. And I think that regarding the blog post that I wrote, these are maybe helpful, but without being a stand-in for what I'm describing. So, let's take domain-driven design, for instance. Domain-driven design could actually kind of be a band-aid for the dynamic that I'm talking about. And you could have companies become like domain-driven design consultancies, meaning they don't really focus in a particular domain. They just go around from domain to domain doing software and saying, hey, we have this methodology that sort of copes for our unfamiliarity with your domain. We can learn it really fast. We have all these exercises that teach it to us, and then we work with you from there. So I think that they're good approaches. I think that they help with things, but I don't think that they're a substitute or a better version of kind of what I'm talking about. I don't think there's any substitute for someone building up kind of a career's worth of knowledge and expertise about a domain. And I think if you did have this thing that I was talking about, like the hearing aid programmer, you wouldn't really need these approaches as much, because these approaches are almost remediation for the problem that I'm talking about, which is the generalized unstructured programmer who says whatever, I don't, domain doesn't matter to me, I just learn new tech stacks and write the code. So yes, familiar with one, now sort of familiar with the others. I think they're good. I think they help with the current situation, but I don't think they're a solution to be used in lieu of what I was proposing. Okay, that was a long one. Next up, here's one that will maybe be a little bit shorter. How does your final effective tax rate compare to being a wage slave? Is it roughly equivalent, or is it roughly 15% more because of self-employment tax, or ... question mark. So for those of you not familiar with the context, this was just a reader question. Somebody wrote in to email me, and the title of the email was something about effective tax rate. And so this is a little bit U.S. specific.
USA, USA, USA.
So pardon me to those of you who are viewing in other countries, but maybe you can get something out of this. All right, so in the U.S., there is, and let me preface this by saying I am not an accountant. This is based on my experience running a couple of businesses, being an employee, paying people, etc. Like I have a good bit of background into this, especially running the finances for the business, but I am not an accountant. This information could get dated. It could be slightly wrong. Please weigh in the comments if you think I'm getting something wrong. Okay, caveats out of the way. In the U.S., there is this thing called FICA, and that rolls together like Medicare and Social Security. And with this, those taxes come in total to about 15% of your pay. But what happens when you're an employee is you and your employer share that burden. So when you're working for Acme Inc. and you look at your paycheck breakdown, something like 7% of your paycheck pre-tax goes to FICA, which is Social Security, which theoretically you will get out when you retire, and then Medicare, which I don't think you get back, but you get to be in Medicare when you retire. 7% of your check comes out. Your employer then also pays 7%. You don't really see that on your paycheck. It happens opaquely to you. And so they just pay that. And what happens is when you go off on your own, even if you're aware of this Social Security and Medicare kick, this FICA, even if you're aware of that and prepared for it when you're managing your own taxes as a freelancer, you aren't prepared, probably, at least a lot of us aren't, for the government coming in and saying, oh, you are the employee and the employer now, so I want both. I want both halves of this.
So, it's been 24 hours. Got my money? Oh, you know what? Just give me till next Friday. I'll have it for you. Oh, that's funny. I could have sworn I said have it today. Yeah, I don't have it. Sorry. Oh, well, all right then. That's good, OJ.
And this is where this 15% figure comes from. So you're used to paying about 7%, 7.5%, but now suddenly the government wants 15%. So to answer this question, in the simplest terms, when you go off on your own, yes, the self-employment tax is 15%, but it is going to be a marginal 7.5% to you. So you have been all along paying half of that, the 7.5%, but now you're going to be paying an additional 7.5%. So that's a very lengthy answer to the question, which is all things being equal, when you quit and you go freelance, you're going to be paying 7.5% more in taxes than you were, and that is the so-called self-employment tax. Though if you go research this, it gets pretty ambiguous. Like you'll see the difference referred to as the self-employment tax. You'll see the whole thing referred to as the self-employment tax. But that's how it works. That's why I wanted to go into detail. So, yeah, good timing on this. I'm actually doing some things with the IRS right now, going back related to what I'm about to talk about, which is S corporation status as a filer. So all things being equal, you quit your job, you go off on your own, you pay more taxes. Bummer. But there is a way that you can sort of mitigate this, and it has to do with how you file. So when you go off on your own, your default might be to form a sole proprietorship, which, I mean, you don't form, you just are if you start doing businesses yourself, or you might form an LLC. In either case, those are pass-through taxing situations where, I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but basically you're just going to pay that extra self-employment tax by default. It's a pretty simple structure. This is still like your personal income tax filing. Your LLC doesn't file income taxes. But what you can do is form an S Corp or C Corp. Well, not form. You can tell the IRS that you want your sole proprietorship or your partnership, LLC, to be taxed as an S Corp or a C Corp. And then things get a little more complicated and a little bit different. When you tell the IRS that you want to be in that structure, you have to start running payrolls. And when you're running payrolls, you have a company, and you're still, as part of that company, the company is paying the employer's half of those FICA taxes. And when you do a payroll and pay yourself, you're paying the other half of those. But you can also take income out of the business as what's called a distribution or a dividend. So it's like you're a shareholder and you're paying yourself a dividend.
Jackpot!
And that income isn't subject to either half of the FICA tax. So you can basically create the situation where maybe like 50% of your income is through payroll, and then your business is paying half of the FICA, you're paying half of the FICA, but then you're taking out a bunch of other income that isn't subject to either half. And so to finally wrap up answering this question, which I thought would be short, but c'est la vie, to finally wrap up answering this, you can actually have a reduced tax burden this way compared to being employed. So I probably, with Hit Subscribe, Amanda and I probably pay a little bit less in tax-related, pay a little bit less in FICA than we would with the same gross income as employees. So your tax burden can actually, when you're on your own or a small business owner, be a little bit less. All right, question 3. Eric, I had a question on how you invoice and get paid from new clients outside the U.S. for remote and or on-site engagements. My question stems from the fact that a new client is a potential risk with regards to integrity and reliability. Will they pay you? Will they pay you on time, etc.? I imagine debt collecting in a foreign country would be very difficult and time-consuming. Are there any payment providers or platforms, PayPal, etc., that you are aware of that make this process easier or simpler? If you have another policy, I would be interested to hear from you. I am sure I could apply your experience or suggestions to my situation in Australia. Let's see here. So yeah, I definitely have a lot of experience with this. Hit Subscribe, for instance, has clients all over the globe. And we also pay subcontractors all over the globe. The first thing I would say is you are going to have no luck collecting debt in other countries. You probably won't have any luck collecting debt in your own country. You're absolutely right about that. The biggest thing I would do to mitigate risk is to ask for payment up front, either payment in full or a deposit. So when you write a proposal, you could say something like, I require 25% payment up front and 75% upon completion, or maybe just everything up front. And doing that has a few effects. Number one, it works out any kinks in like the payment logistics, which is part of what you're asking about. Number two, it demonstrates they have skin in the game. So you can, it demonstrates that they're serious. You can avoid risk to some extent by you don't show up or do any actual work until you see that they will work through the payment logistics and give you money. And I think that's really important. So that is, in terms of a policy, the thing I would most definitely recommend, especially in terms of international clients, because if you're going to have any like recourse with them, you're going to have to create a contract that stipulates like in what jurisdiction you would have things adjudicated.
You made me look stupid. I'm gonna sue you too.
Well, fine. Go ahead and sue me.
I will. I'll sue you in England.
And probably they're not going to agree to fly to your country and be in court there. So it would mean trying to collect debt is flying over to their country. So yes, you're assuming a lot of risk. Mitigate it by collecting some or all of the payment up front. And then in terms of how we handle that, just logistically, yes, PayPal. PayPal is a big one. If you are a business, PayPal is going to take an absolutely jaw-dropping amount out of your total payments unless you set yourself up as PayPal business. So if you're going to use PayPal, set yourself up as a PayPal business. And then the fees are actually very small. You just have to wait a couple days for funds to clear or something like that. So seriously, otherwise, I remember, PayPal's fees being hundreds of dollars on payments that were, $2,000 to $4,000. So PayPal is one. Wire transfers, there's going to be fees on both ends for that, $10 or $15 for me, something like that. Not the best, but not the worst. And then there are other services we'll use in a pinch in certain situations, like Zoom or TransferWise. You can go look into those. And those, I think, are just wrappers around like ACH payments or wires. I'm not sure exactly how they work, but I have used both on both sides, and they can be pretty successful too. So yeah, that's it. Make sure to collect some payment up front, and then check out these services that I've mentioned. All right, fourth question. Hi, Mr. Eric. I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit because this reader's English isn't so great. He's coming from Egypt, and so it sounds to me like he's saying, I'm working in Egypt as an IT administrator. I don't perceive that this is going to be a great career path. What do you recommend for how I can kind of move into doing something different? So I'm making some inferences there. You can see the reader question here on the screen. And I want to preface this by saying I can't really speak to the particulars of the IT or software market in Egypt. I don't know a lot about that. I actually did visit Egypt once some years back, and I remember outside of Cairo there was this whole area where, you know, there was like Microsoft and Oracle. It was like a tech center. So I'm assuming there is, you know, some software development market there, you know, thriving at least in some capacity. And I'm going to speak from my knowledge of that, which is to say that you probably want to maybe move from being an admin into something like DevOps engineering or software engineering. And if you're going to do that, I'm going to kind of assume that what you talk about being an IT administrator is sort of like simple things like, you know, user support, watching out over the Outlook server, or whatever it is you're doing. So to transition from that, the first thing I would suggest doing off the cuff is to like put your eye on DevOps engineering and try to move towards that. So I don't know exactly what your job entails, but whatever it entails, start adding some, you know, monitoring, working with like observability and logging, building reports around that. Start to move into doing some of that and familiarize yourself with those concepts, those technologies, etc., and work them into your normal job description. Like make that indispensable to what you're doing. So you're not just helping users when the email system goes down, but you're, you know, monitoring the Outlook server for potential problems, presenting reports to the higher ups and saying, you know, here's our, you know, email performance or whatever over the course of time. They will come to rely on that and like it. And then that, you know, will become part of your kind of core job description if you do it right. As you're doing that, I would also start to look into and teach yourself some scripting, you know, automating batch processes, doing this sort of thing. And I think these two things together are going to arm you pretty well to make a play to become a DevOps engineer. And then once you kind of feel comfortable and you're starting to read some of these DevOps engineer job descriptions, then maybe you want to make a move, start interviewing for them, and maybe that's an internal move if your company has that available, or maybe it's an external move, you go take a job somewhere else. And then I think, depending on what you want to do, if you get a toehold there with kind of like going from admin to like true operations to then DevOps engineering, once you're in DevOps, I think you can go pretty much anywhere. Like you could naturally transition into software engineering if that's what you wanted, stay in DevOps. Like you're going to have a lot of opportunities from there. So that's kind of the career play in broad strokes that I would suggest from your current situation. And hopefully that helps you. Best of luck with your career. All right, I am going to wrap it there. Thanks for your patience while I was on vacation. I'm looking to do more of these videos and bring you more content over the coming weeks at somewhat of a higher cadence. So I will wrap and say that if you liked this video, I would love a like. As the channel grows, that really is actually helpful for the channel. If you're just getting here and you like this content and want to see more, you can subscribe and remember to click the bell down below, because that is what will notify you when I put new videos on the channel. Of course, if you didn't like this video, I always like to say this, feel free to give it a thumbs down. I will take that feedback. I'm not just looking for fluff. I want to know what people enjoy and don't enjoy about these videos. And with that, I will say, as always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.